Hi, my name is Susan Reid. We're at King Arthur Flowers Baking Education Center, and I want to talk to you a little bit about kinds of yeast. We run a baker's hotline here at King Arthur, and we get more questions about yeast than almost anything else that people want to know about. So I thought it would be helpful to explain how yeast has evolved over centuries and explain the different types of yeast and what they're good for. Before there was any kind of commercial yeast available, there was sourdough. So what you're looking at here is a starter that is active and ready to go. It's got lots of bubbles in it. When the pioneers came across the plains, they had sourdough usually tucked inside their jacket so it wouldn't freeze and they would be able to make bread in the morning. So this is what started it all. After sourdough, the first commercial yeast was what's called cake yeast. This is what it looks like. You can buy it in the store in 1-ounce packets like this. Most of the time it's available around holiday time in the dairy section in the refrigerator. At the bakery here at King Arthur, we use 1-pound blocks of fresh yeast. This yeast needs to be crumbled up and dissolved in water so that it gets bubbly and is ready to work to make your bread rise. Around the 1850s, 1860s, the technology developed where yeast could be made into a dry form called active dry yeast, and this is what it looks like. This is the yeast that your grandmother baked with for generations. As you can see, the granules are pretty large, and to use this yeast, you need to take a step called proofing, where again, the yeast is introduced to some water, it dissolves in the water, and then it's hydrated, and it starts to grow. So any recipe that calls for active dry yeast is going to have what's called the proofing step, where you make sure that it's working before you add all your other ingredients. You also can find active dry yeast in packets in the store, and this is pre-measured to make one recipe. Technology developed further to change the way that yeast is dried so that more of the yeast cells would survive, and that brings us over here to instant yeast. Instant yeast doesn't have to be mixed with water before it's added to a recipe. You can just add it with the dry ingredients and the yeast will work. You can use either of these two yeasts in any recipe. This is one of those things that we get a lot of questions about. If a recipe is written for active dry yeast and all you have is instant, that's fine. Just add instant yeast to all the other ingredients and go. If a recipe is written for instant yeast and all you have available is active dry, just take some liquid from the recipe, proof the yeast, and then continue on mixing all the other ingredients. Further along, yeast technology has developed a little bit more to come up with some proprietary yeasts called rapid rise or quick rise yeast. Those are trademark names. And this is a yeast that's a form of instant yeast, but it's not exactly the same. This kind of yeast is meant to give you one good rise. This is a good yeast if you want to make a pizza dough really quickly. You mix it, and within 45 minutes, the dough is ready to bake. But if you want to make a loaf of bread that needs 2 or even 3 rises, this is not as good a choice. You want to stay over here. So all of these yeasts are available in one form or another. A lot of people like the flavor of fresh yeast. At King Arthur, we test most of our recipes with instant yeast because it's the fastest and we don't have to take the extra 10 minutes to proof it. But I hope that helps explain all the different kinds of yeast and how they came to be. And that way you can make a better choice when you're at the grocery store. Make sure you pay attention to what the labels say. We'll save you later on.